Okay, I've just been told that I am live. Welcome to my panel. Let's discuss equestrian villains with Zerosian Pony. That's me. During this panel, I'm going to be covering the main equestrian villains from the Series 1 all the way through till Series 9. I hope it's entertaining for all of you. I've got a few talking points written down just to make sure that I don't lose any track of anything. So I will be taking some questions towards the end, but I won't be able to check them until I've actually finished talking about each villain. So I will be able to see them, just not until the topic has been concluded. So do feel free to ask any questions if you have any about discussing. So I will check them in the Ocelus stage chat questions. We should probably start off with Nightmare Moon, considering she's the first villain from the first series. So let's start by saying, was Nightmare Moon really a villain? A lot of different motives for what she was doing. Most of the time it was to do with her feeling neglected. So based on what we've seen in the actual series, in the episodes where they've got alternate timelines, there isn't really a lot that's gone too differently when it comes to Equestria under Nightmare Moon's rule. So we do have to question whether or not she's really a villain. Because villains tend to want to sort of take over Equestria for their own benefit, as opposed to the benefit of other people or other ponies. Whereas Nightmare Moon, she's very different, because under her rule, nothing seems to have changed that much. The only difference being it's nighttime. Like, the ponies themselves, they seem to be quite sort of happy. It might be because they just don't know any better, really, but we do have to take that into account. There is something else that we need to think about with Nightmare Moon as well. This is just a personal theory I've had about her for quite some time, which is, we obviously know that Luna and Nightmare Moon aren't necessarily the same entity. Princess Luna on multiple occasions has shown that she doesn't really have that many memories of her time as Nightmare Moon. So something that I thought about regarding this is, could Nightmare Moon possibly have been corrupted by some sort of external entity? For example, with the Pony of Shadows, who we'll be talking about later, Stygian mentions on numerous occasions a quote darkness that spoke to him. So it makes me wonder, could perhaps Nightmare Moon's appearance have been some kind of aftermath from Stygian's banishment when he became the Pony of Shadows? Perhaps there could have been some sort of dark entity that attached itself to her and then on the emotion she was feeling. Because she was feeling quite, for want of a better word, depressed. Because throughout her entire life, when she'd been raising the moon, the ponies were ignoring it. They were sleeping through the night and not paying any attention to her moon. So she was feeling quite unappreciated. She was feeling a very strong emotion. Whereas Stygian, when he was corrupted into the Pony of Shadows, he was feeling a quite strong sense of, for want of a better word, hatred. So these two strong emotions could be the enabling factor that enables these exterior entities to sort of latch onto a pony and then corrupt them. And it does make me wonder whether or not Moon is connected to that in some way. Just 1 second, I'm just going to check my talking points. That also begs the question. We know that during the Well of Shade, where Stygian speaks to the Shadow for the first time, we know that there is some sort of portal or some sort of opening that gives a connection to these other entities, which makes me question, could there be other portals out there that connect to Equestria in some way that open these doors and let these entities through? It does beg the question, because how many times have we seen villains in the series that have either acted through duress, so to speak, acted where they're not being necessarily themselves. Could there be some sort of driving force behind it, some sort of external entity that wants to latch onto ponies and then control them? It really makes you think twice about whether or not Nightmare Moon would have been different. I'm losing track here. For that, we have to think about whether or not Princess Luna, when she became Nightmare Moon, we need to think about whether or not she had control of her own actions. We need to think whether or not it was her that was doing the things that she was doing, such as when she attacked Celestia, or whether it was this other entity which was controlling her. And to be honest, I'd like to hear some other opinions on that. I'll just see if I can get one of the staff to open the question chat, because I would like to hear the opinions on this particular part. I've just asked if one of the staff can open the question chat so you can ask some questions about that. I'm tripping up over my words a little bit here, and I do apologise for that. But the gist of what I'm saying is, could there have been some sort of outside force that influenced Nightmare Moon? Because we don't really get to see much of her. We've only seen her a handful of times. And even then, the times that we have seen her, she hasn't really done that much damage. It does beg the question as to whether or not Nightmare Moon is in control of her own actions. Oh, I can see there are some people typing, so I'll wait and see if there are any questions. I'm just going to check through my talking points while I wait for these questions to come through. I am keeping the questions chat through my mobile, so I will be able to see the questions when they come in. Main stage chat. Just bear with me a second and I'll read through what you typed. You do make a good point there about the Nightmare Moon allowing ponies with a lot of power to exist. That would make that's one of the downfalls of Nightmare Moon's particular reign, is that she does seem to suppress a lot of potential. That's something I will acknowledge. But the thing is, compared to the timelines we saw where there are other villains, there isn't really like that much badness going on. I mean, granted, she's very, I'll give her that. But compared to, for example, the Tirek timeline, where absolutely everything is just in ruins, it does make you think: is she a villain? I suppose to an extent she would be a villain because she is controlling, the destiny of the ponies, not allowing them to achieve their full potential. But it does sort of... I'm repeating myself a little bit here, I'm sorry about that. I'll just take a look at the other questions, hold on. Okay. Yeah, that would be a point. Is it definitely wouldn't be any kind of living, it would just be basic survival. Because I'm not going to allow any kind of threat to her rule. That is definitely a point that's accurate. And yeah, it would... I don't know whether it would necessarily make the character weaker if there was an outside influence. It's just, we have to think about it. For example, when Stygian talks about his experience being the Pony of Shadows, he explicitly refers to an outside entity. And we'll touch more on this later because Stygian is one of the villains that I'll be talking about. But I'm getting tripped up over my words again, I'm sorry. But basically, when Luna became Nightmare Moon, it's a similar sort of thing with the Tantabus. We've seen that the Tantabus is an entity that sort of latches on ponies and then eats their dreams. Even though Luna created that entity, it could be that Luna sort of used something else to create the Tantabus, which, it would lean more towards some sort of outside entity. I wouldn't say it would necessarily weaken her character, because it's more of like, it gives some depth to like why she became the way she did. All of a sudden she just snapped, whereas she'd been dealing with these issues for years and years, where she'd had all of this, all of this neglect by Celestia and everybody ignoring her knight. All of these things would definitely give the character more depth, when all of a sudden she's just snapped like that. Oh, there's another question. Hold on. There's quite a few things to read here. Just bear with me for a second. Yeah, that is a point. It is a matter of looking at it from perspective. Because obviously, even though she was being overshadowed, what she did wasn't necessarily the right course of action. That's definitely a point to think about. Being in control of her actions but not her thoughts. That is a very good point, actually, Amethyst Shade. That's a very good point. There is definitely... Oh, sorry, I didn't see that question before, Pumpkin. I'll answer this one first, because obviously Pumpkin's already asked that and I might have missed it. But if there is no sun, how do you think plants and stuff survive? Well, that's the thing. Plants don't necessarily need sunlight to survive. They just need some form of light, which the moon does give. It gives light. Plus, we can also use artificial light as well. For example, torchlight. It doesn't necessarily have to be the sun itself that makes things grow, because during the Nightmare Moon timeline in To Wear and is it not To Wear? Is it the QT remarking? Yeah, that's the right one. During that episode, we see the Nightmare Moon timeline, and we see that, all these disastrous thoughts on, like, whether things would have stopped growing and whether everything would be plunged into eternal winter. None of these things have happened, so there must be some sort of keeping plants and things alive, otherwise everyone would have died of starvation. So there's definitely got to be something there that's mitigating that. Now I'll move back on to the other point. Character husband. You've made all the decisions. Yeah, that is another good point, is that she might necessarily not have been in the right mind. Because Luna definitely did make some bad decisions, that's for sure. It could have been that Luna accepted this entity willingly, though, is the thing. If there was some sort of outside entity that took control, she could have willingly accepted that. There is no guarantee whether it was forceful or whether it was willing, like Stygian. Hold on, I can see there's another question I've missed here. Just bear with me. That is an interesting point about Princess Luna being one whole being, with her as the good side and Nightmare Moon as the bad. Sort of a Jekyll and Hyde thing going on there. That's a concept that a lot of people seem to really like about Luna. That's probably one of the reasons why Luna is such a beloved character. The Nightmare Moon could sort of resurface at any time and then take control of the personality. That is some... I suppose that could be things. We have seen that Luna can take the form of Nightmare Moon, but I get the feeling that was more a shape-shifting spell than anything. Like, I get the feeling that was more just like an illusion or something for the Nightmare Night to scare the kids in that one episode. And I can see there's another question being typed up here. I'll just wait for that one to come through. But personally, my theory on it is definitely that there was some kind of outside force. Obviously, there's no guarantee that my theory would be 100% right. But if we look at, say, the way that certain things have happened with, for example, portals to other worlds and things along those lines, there have been incidents where magic has possessed people. For example, if we look at the Equestrian Girls series, how many times has magic possessed a student there when it's through some sort of portal, and it's caused them to go haywire because they've got no idea how to control the immense magic they've been given? A similar sort of thing could have happened with Princess Luna, where she was inexperienced and she's suddenly been given this vast amount of power, whether it's magic or an entity or something along these lines, where she could have just been overloaded, so to speak. Yeah, that is definitely a point. That she could just be misguided and not necessarily a villain. Right, we should probably move on to the next villain because I've got several to cover and I've only got 1 hour to cover it in, so I should probably move on to the next one. Obviously, going by the series, the order in which the villains appear, we're now going to be talking about Queen Chrysalis. This one's a bit difficult because a lot of the stuff involving Queen Chrysalis doesn't actually take place in the show, it's more in the comics. But there are some points that I've got written here that would probably raise an eyebrow. The first thing I've got here is, could Chrysalis have been redeemed if the main 6 and the changeling, the new reformed changelings had tried hard enough? And I think that a lot of people don't want to see. A lot of people want there to be villains that are irredeemable, which is unfortunately how it ended, where, you know, with Chrysalis being turned to stone, spoiler. A lot of people did not want to see Chrysalis reformed. They wanted there to be a villain that just cannot be changed. But we have to think about, could she have been changed? If the main 6 and Starlight Glimmer and the changelings, if they'd all tried a lot harder to sort of get through to Chrysalis, could there have been some part of her somewhere that wanted to be redeemed? And however unlikely it may be, it does sort of, you know, you have to think about these things, because when the changelings when they formed, it wasn't sort of like a magical event, it was a metamorphosis. It was naturally part of them, it's what they were supposed to do. Is that about Chrysalis, that particular point? Because I can't tell whether you're talking about Nightmare Moon or Chrysalis. Why is she so popular? Because she's flawed. That's probably to do with Nightmare Moon, that particular one. Well, back to Chrysalis. If we look into Chrysalis's past, which is in the Fiendship is Magic series, we see a lot of examples of how she's acted. For example, she took the title of Queen. The reason why she calls herself Queen Chrysalis is because she attacked and took over a Pegasi settlement that was run by a king called Orion. She quite literally turned into one of the head guards, ordered a retreat, and then got them all into one room. And when they were all in one room, she locked them all in and then devoured their love. That's how she sort of took over, and she called herself the Queen after she had started that raid. So that does sort of lean towards Chrysalis being, for want of a better word, unredeemable, because she's done a lot of malicious things over the years. But we also have to take into account, has she been doing it for herself and for her own gain, or was she doing it for her subject? Because a lot of the time, Chrysalis says things along the lines of, she'll say things along the lines of, I am the changeling queen, it takes a lot to rule the changelings, I am the one that decides what is best. I can't remember the exact quote, but during To Where and Back Again, Chrysalis does explicitly say that she's the one in charge and it's up to her to know what's best for her subjects. Yeah, that particular comic is definitely worth a read. It's really good. There is a lot of things in there that expand on Chrysalis's backstory. We even actually get to see exactly where Chrysalis came from, which, for those that don't know, according to that particular comic, the way that Chrysalis and her changelings came to be was there was a magic swamp, and Starswell was exploring this swamp. He set up camp next to this really strange-looking tree, and he felt that it had some sort of magic about it. And then a mosquito landed on him and bit him. And then this mosquito flew over to the tree, landed on the tree, and merged with it. The tree merged with this particular mosquito. So it took Starswirl's magical blood, created the changelings. The changelings burst forth from this tree. And that's actually how the changelings came to be. So there is one particular theory of Chrysalis being some sort of corrupted princess. That particular comic does actually debunk that, I'm afraid. Brilliant though that theory was. Oh, hold on, there's a couple of questions I've just noticed. Yeah, like, with the changelings, there was a lot of hints towards it happening with, obviously, Thorax. And I get the feeling that it was a little bit rushed, but I'm not particularly dissatisfied with how it came out. Like, the changelings did end up getting a lot more fleshed out. We saw a lot of their culture. Obviously not before the reform. We only see bits and pieces of it during the Hive invasion. But after they've reformed, we do get to see a lot more about how they've changed. For example, we see that they've got the Feelings Forum. They have all the different things that they're doing with arts and crafts. That's a good point. The Star Fanatic Fluttershy, that is a really good point, actually. If she'd met Pharynx after he'd reformed, maybe Pharynx could have helped her along the way a little bit. You may have a point there about her not necessarily hating friendship. I get the feeling she's more like, I don't think she hates friendship per se. I think it's more that she was beaten by it. Because if she didn't have friends, she wouldn't have got the Hive. You know, yes, she's their ruler, but she's also the one that provides for them. So she's obviously not without something, because even during the Series 9 episodes, or was it Series 8? I can't remember which, we saw Chrysalis being very, for want of a better word, unstable. She was walking up and down, she was pacing, she was talking about wanting her kingdom back. She wasn't talking necessarily about, destroying them because they've betrayed her. She was talking about getting her kingdom back, which means she does care for her subjects, and that's what she wants. Perhaps she genuinely believes that her way is the right way for the changelings. There is very much a possibility. There's another question here. Do you think the changelings were good guys? No, that is not the case at all. The changelings were not good guys before Chrysalis came charged, because, as I've just pointed out a moment ago, the changelings have always been under Chrysalis's rule, created that way. She didn't hatch the first changelings, they jumped out of the tree with her. That is actually shown in the Fiendship is Magic issue number 5. The changelings do specifically jump out of the tree with Chrysalis, and they're with her from the beginning. She even says towards the end of the comic, there is no backstory, I just always have been. I was created this way. So to an extent, like, the changelings weren't always the way they are now in appearance either. Yes, actually, we do know what causes the holes. During their invasion of a city, I'm just going to have to get the name because it's a very difficult to pronounce name. A man called Emperor Incinatius. He was basically of a very strong empire. He was a very self-obsessed stallion. And Chrysalis invaded his city using a Trojan horse that looked just like him, because they were onto the changelings. They knew that the changelings were coming. So they closed off the city walls and refused to allow them in. Chrysalis wasn't going to have that, so they created a large Trojan horse sort of thing where they inside it. and it looked just like the Emperor because he was very self-absorbed. So when they went in, they jumped out of this particular Trojan horse and started their invasion. Chrysalis absorbed the love from the ruler, sat on his throne. Seconds after she sat on his throne, Celestia comes flying in, burning with rage, and quite literally burns the hole in the changelings. Basically, the holes come from Celestia burning them with fire. And then from there, she imprisons them in a volcano, which is they're later released by a dragon, where Chrysalis tricks the dragon into releasing them. I don't think Chrysalis would listen very much to Ocellus, to be honest. Because Ocellus was actually very, very young when the changelings reformed, because we don't actually know how quickly changelings grow. Well, I get the feeling that Chrysalis wouldn't listen to Ocellus. I get the feeling she'd see her as a naive child. I do feel that perhaps Pharynx might be able to get through to her because of the way that Pharynx was reformed, wherein he learnt that, being reformed does not necessarily mean you have to stop defending the hive. It's a very difficult topic, that particular point. I think I've got some other stuff written. I don't think they're going to make Flufflepuff canon, I'm afraid. Much as that would be very interesting to see, I don't think that's going to happen. I do have one final point to make about Chrysalis as well, is we have seen on numerous occasions that Chrysalis has an immensely powerful strategic mind. She, to even think of building a Trojan horse looking like the self-absorbed Emperor just to get in through the gates and then invade, that takes a lot of brain power. So something to think about here. We've seen on numerous occasions towards the end of Series 9, Tirek is very strategic. For example, when they were chasing Grogar's bell, Tirek immediately knew that he wasn't going to get up that mountain, and he just sat there and created a camp and waited for them to come back with information. So we have to think, does Chrysalis have a higher intelligence than Tirek? That's something that I can't tell. I don't know which of them has the more strategic mind, because they're both brilliant. Yeah, that is a valid point. I personally don't think Chrysalis could have been reformed. Like, in my humble opinion, which is not necessarily the correct opinion, I don't think Chrysalis could have been reformed. I think she would always be those villains that just is so set in her own mindset, so decisive on what she wants, that it's got to be her way or the highway. So that's one thing I do have to agree with quite a lot of the fandom on, is that Chrysalis is sort of, in my opinion, she's a villain that's never going to change. Like, if we look later down in the series, when Cozy Glow is finally villains to work together, who is it that stamps on that and makes them sort of get back on track? It's Chrysalis. She's the one that screams up about them not wanting to be friends. It's I definitely think that Chrysalis is the kind of villain that's never going to change. I'll take, if anyone else has got questions about Chrysalis, just feel free, because I am going to move on in a second, because I've got several villains to cover. I think I've got 7 in total. Because obviously I've left a few villains out, like the minor villains like Flim and Flam. They're not particularly evil, to be honest, they're just misguided. So I've left them out for time. Because unfortunately the panel is only an hour long, so if I brought all the villains in, I wouldn't have enough time to discuss them. I can see someone's typing, so I'll wait for them to finish their question and then I'll move on. Oh, they seem to have stopped, so I'll move on to the next villain. So next we've got King Sombra. This one is a particular favourite of mine because I have a bit of an affinity for crystals myself, to be honest. Oh, hold on, the question has come through. No, I don't. I don't think the changelings could break through that kind of spell, because it wasn't just Celestia and Luna that cast that spell, it was also Discord as well. That's 3 extremely powerful entities. I'm definitely convinced that the changelings could not break Chrysalis out of that. There's no way. They just don't have enough power. Right, on to King Sombra. The first thing we have to consider with this is what were King Sombra's motives, because we don't actually get to see a lot of him in the show. The vast majority of what we know about King Sombra comes from the comics. I haven't actually read this particular comic issue myself. I have skimmed it, so I've got a rough idea of what I'm talking about. We have to think about what was Sombra's motive? Why did he want to control the Crystal Empire? It can't have just been to devour the crystals, because otherwise he could have just done that without them. So, from what we know, King Sombra is an Umbrum. He is a shadow pony. Umbrum is basically, it's Latin. Umbra means shadow. He is an Umbrum, which is a shadow pony, blatant opposite of crystal ponies who are full of light and love. So, underneath the Crystal Empire, there is a sealed away army of Umbrums. The entire Umbrum race is sealed away under the Crystal Empire. And King Sombra's goal was to release them, or that was his original goal. He actually sort of went away from that goal a little bit. Off on his own tangent a little bit with that. He didn't actually end up freeing them in the end before he was deposed. But we don't really see a lot of this during the show itself. It's not. He's just sort of a one-off villain that appears and then gets blasted into oblivion seconds later. Yes, he was digging to free the Umbrums. That is what's happening. Just to point this out, if you're going to raise questions or anything, make sure it's in the questions chat room, because that's the one I'm looking at. The Acellus stage chat itself, I can't have them both up at the same time. So I can only see one or the other. So if you are going to raise questions or comment on what I'm saying, please do put it in the questions room. I should have made that a bit clearer at the beginning, to be honest. Why didn't they bring in Radiant Hope? That's a question for the show's producers. There's no way I could answer that, to be honest, but I can give you my opinion on it, which is perhaps when Sombra was first introduced, I don't think they'd quite fleshed out his story. I think they kind of had him planned as a get blasted into oblivion straight after you appear villain. You know, one of those throwaway villains that's never going to come back. At the time, they hadn't properly developed his story, and then they expanded on it later in the comics. To be honest, I'm still not exactly pleased with how they handled King Sombra at the end, because in the Series 9 finale, or the Series 9 premiere, sorry, I'll get to that in a moment, Jezarat. When they brought him in, when Discord, disguised as Grogar, brought him back, he sort of appeared, and immediately they had changed up his characteristics. They'd made him self-absorbed to the point where, like, when he quite literally says, "I don't do ours, I only do mine." Things along those lines, that doesn't seem like something that Sombra would have originally said, especially considering they actually changed his voice actor a little bit. Because when he first appeared, the only line he had was, "That is mine." Or, well, he had a few others actually. Had "That is mine, my crystal slaves." He only had a very few lines. He didn't actually make that much of an appearance. But when they did bring him, they brought him in to sort of give him this appearance. It was a hell of a letdown. There was a lot that they didn't show. Like, there was nothing about the Umbrums. There was nothing about Sombra's backstory. There was nothing about his motives. All we knew was that he wanted to conquer the Crystal Empire and then fill it with dark crystals, because that's all he was doing. That's basically all he was doing throughout the episode. Room with dark crystals. But they could have reformed him, I suppose. That was something I was hoping for. I actually made a video on that just before the Season 9 premiere. I reviewed the trailer, and I was even pointing out that I would love to see a reformed King Sombra. Well, unfortunately, it doesn't look as though we're going to get that. That's obviously, now that the show has ended, there's no chance of us getting that. But he's gone for good now. There's no chance of him coming back. Right, I'd also like to talk about why Sombra destroyed the Tree of Harmony, and the question, could the main six create a Tree of Harmony in its place? Because as has been established in the show canon, the Tree of Harmony is a crystal seed that was imbued with the energies of Equestria. They then planted that seed and it grew into the Tree of Harmony, which controls the magic of the Everfree Forest. In theory, the main six could, or the young six for that matter, could also do this. They could just put their energy into a crystal seed and plant it, and it would become another Tree of Harmony. But the question we have to think about is, why did Sombra destroy it? He destroyed the Tree of Harmony because he thought that was the source of Twilight and her friends' power. But outside of that, the Tree of Harmony also represented something else. Because if you look at it very carefully, you'll notice that the Tree of Harmony is made of crystal. And what does Sombra love more than anything else? Crystals. Just bear with me a moment, I've just got to get the chat room back up because my phone just died, so I'm switching over to my tablet. Here we go, Chrysalis stage questions. We do have to think about, like, the tree itself was made of crystals. It was a crystalline in structure. Yeah, sorry about that. We do have to think why Sombra destroyed the tree, because anyone could have seen that the tree wasn't actually the source of the main six's power. Like, the elements of harmony, how many times have we seen them act without the elements of harmony? Yes, I asked them to put questions in because I couldn't see, there were some questions being asked in the other chat room and I couldn't see them. I'll check the other room actually, just take a quick look. Yeah, sorry about that. I asked them to make sure they put the questions in this particular room because I can't see the other one. If you want to make comments and things about the characters, that does have to go in the Estella stage chat, but I won't be able to see that. I can only see the questions chat room. Right, where was I? Here we go. Like, it's blatantly clear that the Tree of Harmony wasn't the source of the main six's power, because how many times have we seen them defeat villains without the elements of harmony? There's been loads of times that we've seen them beat villains with their own magic, their own friendship. So the Tree of Harmony definitely wasn't their source of power, and Sombra wasn't an idiot. Like, well, they made him look like a bit, to be honest, but from what we've seen of him in the comics, Sombra is not an idiot. He's supposed to be very strategic, he's meant to be a very cold and calculating villain. So it makes me wonder whether or not they actually cut that for time, because if they'd have gone more in depth with Sombra, there would have been a lot more character there, other than just appearing and then being destroyed again like before. There was definitely a lot of potential there that was lost, unfortunately. Because just to look at the Tree of Harmony, I can't understand how he would look at that and then think destroying that would completely stop the main six doing anything, because we've seen them in action before. We've seen that the Tree of Harmony is not the limit of their power. No, I don't think that's the case at all. I don't think that Discord, disguised as Grogar, didn't bring him back again because he felt too threatened. I get the feeling, to be honest, that he was just irritated by him, because let's be honest, he was a little bit annoying. Speaking of which, I'm actually going to get onto Grogar in a few moments when I get through to that. But just to let you know in advance, the Grogar that I'm going to be discussing is not the Discord disguise. I'm going to be discussing what we know about the actual Grogar. I'm actually going to move on to the next villain because I think I'm going to run out of time if I don't get this done soon. We've got the next three villains here. We've got Tirek. I apologise if anyone wants to continue talking about the villains I was just reviewing there, but I've got to move on to the next one. Right, where's my talking points? There they are. Right, first thing we have to think about with Tirek, because this is never actually mentioned in the show. Who is Tirek and where did he come from? Well, we know Tirek's a centaur. see, he's, you know, humanoid top half with the bottom half of a horse, or a pony in this case. Tirek comes from another land wherein centaurs are the dominant species. They are the natives of that land. Tirek is actually a prince. He's not just some random centaur that came to Equestria with, no cause in mind. He is a prince. He's royalty. Hence why he doesn't like it when he's not referred to as Lord Tirek. Because obviously when you speak to a royal, you refer to them as my lord or my lady. So we have to think with Tirek, is his magic consuming ability something that's unique to him? Or is it something that all could learn to do? Because we know that Tirek was taught how to absorb magic. It wasn't just something that he decided to do one day. He was trained by another centaur who was quite elderly. This other centaur was actually going against the law, going against the king, because the king had explicitly told him that he was not to go to Equestria and attempt to capture a pony. And then went to Equestria, captured a pony, brought it back and drained its magic. And that's revealed in Tirek's backstory in another of the Fiendship is Magic episodes. The comic series, sorry, not episodes. And this particular centaur was very old and he was very talented, obviously, because he was able to absorb magic, but he was only doing it in small doses. We've seen Tirek absorb vast quantities of magic, which makes me wonder, is it something that's natural to all centaurs, or is it just something that Tirek has developed? And to be honest, I'm not quite sure on that. I wonder what if anyone else has any opinions on that particular point. I'm just going to check back to my talking points again because I keep losing track. Here we go. Is Tirek irredeemable? Well, let's think about it. Tirek is one of the most cunning villains we've ever seen in the whole series. We've seen on numerous occasions that he manipulates ponies, or even managed to manipulate the Lord of Chaos. He has a massive strategic mind. We've even seen during the episode where they attempt to retrieve Grogar's bell, Tirek immediately knows, as soon as he sees that mountain, he knows he's not going to be able to get up there. So he just walks away and makes a campsite and waits for the other two to come back so they can report what they've seen to him. When we think Chrysalis and Cozy Glow, they were both determined that they were going to get that bell, and they thought that, they didn't need any help. Tirek, on the other hand, realised that he couldn't do it on his own. He acknowledged his failings, so to speak, his flaws. And we have to think, is this something that could be a redeeming quality of him? Because obviously, if he knows that he's going to get beaten, maybe, just maybe, he could be convinced to step down a notch, to step back a bit, and not try to steal the magic from every pony in Equestria. There's a possibility that he could definitely be redeemed, I think, because he's not completely... He's not a complete, lost cause, in my opinion. Because we've seen on numerous occasions that Tirek can be quite misunderstood, especially when he was talking about Scorpen and how Scorpen betrayed him. He gets very emotional about that when he explicitly says about the amulet. Says, it's as worthless to me as he... Which obviously shows that he is very upset that his brother betrayed him. Sorry, I'm just going to check the chat to see if anything else is being said. Sorry about that. You have just missed me talking about King Sombra. If there's time towards the end, I might talk more, but I have got some other villains to get through. To be honest, I haven't really got a lot to say about Tirek other than that, is that I don't think he's completely irredeemable. If he could just control his lust for power, then perhaps he could be an asset to Equestria. Perhaps he could be a useful character. Right, let's go on to the next point. Here we are. We've got the Pony of Shadows next. This is another villain that particularly intrigued me, and I have actually got quite a few theories about this one. As I mentioned earlier on, Stygian, who is the pony at the heart of the Pony of Shadows, he mentions in the Well of Shade, he explicitly says, "The dark told me here, and it talked to me. It told me about a power that I could never dream of." He basically talks as though that there is some kind of parasitic entity talking to him and latching on to his negative energy. And this is where I got the theory about Nightmare Moon from. If there was a specific to Ponehenge, the place where Stygian was banished, it was some sort of amplifier or perhaps some sort of portal location to Limbo. And we see when they try to banish Stygian for a second time, they manage to open a portal in the Well of Shade. It could be that the Pony of Shadows, the actual entity itself, not Stygian, who they attach to, it could be that there is another dimension out there where there is a world full of these malicious entities that attach to other creatures. And when they attach to these creatures, they promise them power beyond their imagination, and then they give them that power, and then these ponies just lose their minds because they're so consumed by their hatred and by their emotion that they just don't know what they're doing. And it's definitely... The Pony of Shadows is definitely a very, very interesting villain. He's one of my particular favourites because of, like, the possibilities behind where he could have come from, what his motives truly were. All of these things make the Pony of Shadows a particularly topic. I was planning a video on this, but I unfortunately never got around to making it. But there are a lot of things. There are a lot of points. I'm actually just going to go back to that because I actually wrote a few of these down. Does he have a connection to Nightmare Moon? What would life have been like under the Pony of Shadows? Well, he's in a completely different league to Nightmare Moon. Nightmare Moon wants to keep the world in eternal night, but the Pony of Shadows doesn't just want it to be dark. He wants all forms of light to be completely snuffed out so that ponies can feel the loneliness and darkness that he felt. Imagine what that must be like. Imagine how it would be to that kind of world where there's no friendship, no light, no warmth of any kind. It'd be an absolute disaster. There would be no survival. The Pony of Shadows is definitely a villain to be feared, because had he succeeded, had he managed to drain all the light from the world, ponykind would have had absolutely no hope. There would be no redemption coming. That would have just been it. It would have been the end of the world as we know it. So he's definitely one of the more threatening villains, I suppose is a way to word it. So even if we look at the way he's designed, if you can see the picture on screen at the moment, if we look at the way he's designed, there's a lot of, like, it looks as though a lot of this is attached to him. It doesn't look as though it's a part of him. It looks as though it's attached, which again hints that it could perhaps be a parasitic entity that's latched onto Stygian. We even see during the scene where Stygian is being pulled out of the Pony of Shadows, we see on numerous occasions that this particular entity is wrapping itself around him. So there could definitely be a connection between Nightmare and Stygian. At least I believe there could be. So what exactly caused this creation as well? That's another point that I'd like to discuss. What exactly led to the creation of the Pony of Shadows is we know that Stygian felt an immense hatred for the Pillars because they cast him out when he was only trying to become part of their little group. So... Yes, personally, I don't know whether I would say that I think they're the same energy, but I would definitely say that I think they are They're definitely similar. There's definitely connections between them, in my opinion. Because let's think about it. Luna was feeling, for want of a better word, extreme depression. She was down in the dumps and she felt as though no one appreciated her and that she was always going to be second best. Stygian felt as though no one cared about him because his quote-unquote friends him out of their group, only because he wanted to make a copy of the artifacts so that he could be a part of the group. These two ponies were feeling immense dread, like high amounts of emotion. So I do think that perhaps the same entity, or at least a similar entity, could have latched on to both of them. And considering that Stygian, the Pony of Shadows, actually came before Night, further adds to the possibility that perhaps there could be a connection. Because maybe the entity that managed to sneak through the Well of Shade and attach itself to Stygian, who's to say it's the only entity that got through that particular rift? Who's to say that more entities didn't come through there? And it could be that one of those entities got through and attached itself to Princess Luna. That's just the way I think anyway. Right, we're going to have to move on because I've only got 10 minutes left. So I've got to make sure that I cover all the villains. What can we say about Cozy Glow? Not much, to be honest. There isn't really much to think about. She is an extremely devious little filly. There is no other way to word it other than that. I mean, just look at her cutie mark. Piece. It looks as though it's a rook. That, to me, insinuates that Cozy's special talent, or Cozy's purpose in life, is to manipulate, to play the game, to be the chess master, the one that's in charge of the pieces. She is definitely a nasty piece of work. There is no redemption for her, in my view. Because she was given the chance. She was given the chance when she was in Tartarus. Even when she was in Tartarus, she was still trying to latch on to Tirek. She just seeks out the nearest form of power and just uses it. That's for want of a better word. She just uses everything to her advantage. I mean, just look at when they were using the power from Grogar's bell. Cozy was the one that immediately attempted to absorb the chaos magic and overpower the other two. She even said, "You fools, now I have more power than both of you." She's just devious. There is no redemption for her. There's nothing about her that could be a redeeming quality. She is just, for want of a better word, she's devious. I'd think about any other way to word it. She is definitely a manipulative and villainous child. To be honest, she reminds me a little bit of another character from another series, but I can't really go too much into that. But I was actually going to be doing a video on this. There was a specific series I had in mind where I was going to talk about these villains. But yeah, Cozy Glow, no redemption for her. She's just evil. She's rotten to the core. Right, I'm actually going to move on to the last villain now because this one is one that has particular interest for me. Grogar, the father of monsters. We don't really get to see very much about the real Grogar because the only one that we really get to know anything about is the disguise that Discord was using. Now, I know there's been a lot of people in the fandom that have made videos on this topic. For example, I know Dr. Wolf made a video about this, and I think Sawtooth Waves made one as well, where a lot of people think, did Grogar create Discord? Personally, I don't think that's the case. Because we look at Discord, it's been confirmed to us now that Discord is a chaos spirit. He is not a monster per se. He is not a fusion of ponies and monsters and animals. Because if we look at when Twilight and her friends are trapped in Tartarus with Tirek, they take the magic out of the Chimera, and the Chimera is an amalgamate of animals. Look at that. When they take the magic out of the Chimera separates into its composite parts. Discord had his magic drained by the Bell of Grogar, and he didn't you know, discombobulate. He didn't split into his appropriate parts, which makes me think that Discord is not a creation and that he is a manifestation of chaos, which we have actually been... We've been teased about that before with the whole episode where Discord starts to fade when he becomes normal. So personally, I'm of the opinion that Grogar did not create Discord. I think that Discord is actually above and beyond Grogar. Another point I want to raise specifically about this particular character. Here, in the show, Grogar was a fearsome force. He was a fearsome force to be reckoned with. From what we've seen, he literally ruled Equestria under an iron hoof. There was no chance. There was nothing that PonyKind could do with a particular rule. When we think about it, the bell around his neck, or the bell that would be around his neck, the bewitching bell, as it's specifically referred to, I think perhaps Grogar's bell actually has more than one purpose. I don't think it's just to drain magic. Because, think about it. Why would a bell that's purpose is to suck the magic out of things, why would it be called the bewitching bell? To bewitch something is to bring it under your control, is to make it obsessed with you. Which makes me think, perhaps Grogar's bell has more than one purpose. Perhaps it could be used for hypnosis. It could be used to bring ponies under his control. He even used it to hypnotize monsters and then put them all together. Maybe that's why they called him the father of monsters, because he could control monsters using his bewitching bell. If anyone has anything to say about Grogar, I'd very much like to hear it, because he is definitely one of the more fascinating legends in the in the world of Equestria. I definitely do want to know any opinions on Grogar or anything to say about him, because we've only got 3 minutes left on this particular panel, and to be honest, I think I've done a lot of tripping up here, but I'm hoping that people have enjoyed the topics that I did bring up. I think I've got one more point to raise. The last point I would like to raise about Grogar is, would he be a threat to Equestria if the real Grogar, not Discord's disguise, if the real Grogar came to Equestria, what kind of threat would he pose? Because Celestia, when she hears Grogar's name, Celestia is immediately thrown into a fit of rage. She specifically goes for Discord and says, thought Grogar was a good, or you thought impersonating Grogar was a good thing to do. So we have to think, if Celestia is, for want of a better word, frightened of Grogar, what kind of threat would he pose? If he could walk around Equestria running amok with his monsters, what kind of threat would he pose? Because I personally think he would be the biggest threat he has ever faced. I think with his immeasurable amounts of power, based on what we know about him, I think he would definitely be a force to be reckoned with. And with that, I'm probably going to have to cut it off there, because there's only 2 minutes left on the panel. If anyone wants to talk about the point raised, you can message me on Discord. I'm more than happy to continue talking about it with you. I'm actually going to be making a few videos on this topic in the coming weeks. But I really hope this particular panel was entertaining for you, considering it's the first one on the Chrysalis stage. And I hope that you're going to enjoy the rest of the panels today as well. I'll probably cut the stream off, because it's going to be coming to a close in a moment. Anyway, thank you very much for tuning into this panel, and I really hope that you enjoyed it.